Welcome to the NHL Wraparound podcast featuring Neil Smith, President General Manager of the 1994 Stanley Cup champion New York Rangers, and longtime ESPN NHL veteran Vic Morren. Together, they share no-nonsense opinions on news and issues around the National Hockey League. Whether you're a casual or diehard fan, each episode of NHL Wraparound will leave you more informed. Now, here's your hosts, Neil and Vic.
Welcome to NHL Wraparound for Tuesday, June 10th, 2025. Vic Morren, along with Neil Smith, and we will be joined shortly by the Oilers and Sportsnet play-by-play man, Jack Michaels. But first, the ugly stick came out big time for the Edmonton Oilers in Game 3 of the Cup Final down in Florida on Monday evening.
I don't think I've ever seen this Oiler squad in the last few years become this completely undisciplined in a game and completely fall apart the way they did in game number 3.
That's going to be part of 3 things you need to pay attention to, brought to you by UBS Financial Services, Inc. Number 1, and typically we throw an item out here, but we don't necessarily editorialize. I thought this was an ugly night for the NHL in Game 3. 140 penalty minutes, 17 power plays, 24 minutes and 51 seconds of total power play time. That was almost half the game was spent with the extra man. Florida had 15 minutes and 25 seconds of power play time, but so much shenanigans went on last night. And when you looked at the first 2 games and people saying, you know what, this series could be set up for being an all-time classic, and it still might by the time the series is over. But boy, this was just not a good look last night.
No, it was not a good look at all. The lack of discipline by the Oilers was astounding. And Evander Kane, we've given him tons of compliments on this show because he deserves them. And the way he's played has been outstanding in these playoffs. But boy, I thought he completely came unglued at times last night.
Just in the first period alone, and 4 power plays that the Panthers had, 3 as a result of offensive zone penalties, the 4th result of too many men on ice. So that kind of set the evening up right there of the 11 power plays that Florida had during the course of Game 3.
And you heard what Chris Knobloch said during one of those silly bench interviews that I hate so much, where he said that the way we've started this game with these penalties is a recipe for disaster. And he was right.
And that's one of the few times that you can actually pay attention to something that a coach says and actually remember it as you did.
Yeah. Well, because it turned out to be absolutely right.
Number 2, Panthers' physicality. And we had spoken right at the outset of this series in our preview that the Oilers would probably have to beat the Panthers at their own game. But in this one, Florida took it to Edmonton early, often, and really left their mark on this one.
They did, but the thing again is, whereas in the first 2 games, I think the Panthers played physical and tried to do the same thing, but the Oilers stayed glued. In this game, they completely came unglued, and the Sam Bennett, Brad Marchand, Matt Tkachuk shenanigans paid off.
And that dovetails right into number 3, which you mentioned before, the Oilers' lack of discipline, because some of the penalties that Edmonton took were absolutely appalling in terms of the sheer stupidity of them. A lot of chops, a lot of late hits, a lot of guys that you wouldn't even expect getting into the mix like Kasperi Kapanen. And this was just a complete collective brain fart by the Oilers in this game.
It was. And, again, I want to mention that we've given Corey Perry so many compliments on this show, and deservingly, and Evander Kane, two guys that are reclamation projects that Ken Holland brought aboard during his time as GM of the Oilers. But these two guys last night, I mean, they didn't do their team any favors by the way they played the game last night. And you know, and as you said, Kasperi Kapanen, who I had pointed out cost them in the previous game, you know, last night, what was he thinking about? I mean, he was going after his own countryman there with Luosterainen. And it was just a, as you said, it was a shit show from the very beginning.
But I also believe that it's not just restricted to Kane and Perry and Kapanen, extended to Darnell Nurse, extended out to Mattias Janmark. You can extend it anywhere. There was nothing positive to take out of this.
No, and even 97 and 29, the two of the very, very best players in the league, one certainly the best player, and the other one arguably in the top 3 to 5 players in the league, being Draisaitl. I mean, they stayed composed, obviously, but they couldn't do what they do with this kind of chaos going on in this game.
Jack Michaels will help break it all down for us a little bit further, get the Oilers' perspective on things as we head into 2 off days, which is rare when the series is remaining at the same location. But we're going to take care of all that business with him shortly. This has been 3 Things You Need to Pay Attention To, brought to you by UBS Financial Services, Inc. Now, let's welcome in Jack.
Well, we get to bring my friend Jack Michaels into the show, who is, as Vic said earlier, and as most people know, is a play-by-play man for Sportsnet for the Edmonton Oilers. Does a fabulous job there. Jack and I used to work together on ECHL hockey all-star games back in the good old days in places like Ontario, California, and many other places. But Jack, thanks for doing this again.
And many other places that shall not be named, that may not have been as glamorous, like Reading, Pennsylvania, for instance.
Yeah.
And Stockton, California.
And Trenton, I think. We did it in Trenton, New Jersey, right across from the prison. Yeah,
Yes.
right across. Yeah. Talk about a penalty box.
Yeah, no kidding.
Well,
yeah, those were Jack, great years.
Oh, they're the best. It was the best. It was so much fun. And I was doing it free, as were you. I mean, we did those things for free. And that's why it's sort of like this show. Vic and I do this for free. And so do you.
Well, not entirely free. As I recall, Neil, we were getting a robust $36 a day in per diem.
That is true. That is true. Oh boy, those were the days.
You know, Neil, at all that lasts about as long as your touchdown upon arrival.
That gets him like a year's worth of Starbucks, the way he's able to milk that out with free refills and whatnot. So,
well, he's got the points now, and now he's eligible for those free refills. I hate to tell you, Neil, even though you still look like you're. I've already said Neil Smith is one of those guys that for the last 20 years, he looks like he could be anywhere from 37 to 67. You have no idea. It's an amazing talent. I, unfortunately, am aging, and you can see it. Neil has looked the exact same since about 1987.
When I was the Adirondack Red Wings GM in the good old days. Hey, Jack, if you notice, Vic and I are both wearing black shirts today in honor of the Oilers.
Yes, no, I know. Game 3 was an ugly one. You know, I have to say this, Neil. Sometimes it is, you know, how you finish is dictated by your start. And I thought the Oilers were a little discombobulated right from the get-go. There was the kind of wild sequence, which ended up with Brad Marchand scoring into essentially an empty net a minute in. And, you know, there was a brief, Corey Perry, even when Perry scored on the power play, it was odd because Connor McDavid wasn't on the ice. He was getting some equipment repairs. And then, unfortunately from an Edmonton standpoint, a turnover with the game at 2-1, they weren't able to get that game settled. If they were able to even keep it 2-1 for the next 5 or 6 minutes and allow some 5-on-5 play to develop, because up until that point, remember, Perry's was a power play goal. Florida took a silly penalty at the end of the first period, which means that in the first 22 minutes of the hockey game, each team had 4 power plays. So essentially you have 16 of 22 minutes totally disrupted. And at that point at 2-1, what Edmonton needed to do was start running its lines and start, accumulating some 5-on-5 traction. And they just weren't able to do it. They had a turnover a minute 20 later. Poppets in the net. Another turnover at the Florida blue line led to a 2-on-0 4.5 minutes after that. And now it's 4-1. And you know what? Florida's given up a couple of third period leads in this series. They're not giving up a 3-goal lead at home in the Stanley Cup final. And, I just felt like Edmonton never got that game stabilized, especially from a 5-on-5 standpoint.
But that also started right in the first period. They're shorthanded 4 times that you just mentioned. And Neil and I had spoken earlier that those 4 penalties, 3 of them in the offensive zone, and a bench minor for too many men on ice. As a matter of fact, too many men on ice. So that does speak to where they were totally off their mark in this game, literally from the get-go.
Well, and I don't think, again, it was, if you look at the first 22 minutes, it was 4 each way. So it's not like Edmonton was taking more penalties than Florida. But I just don't think
they're taking, though, Jack.
Well, I agree with that, but even all aside, the greater point is that kind of game is going to favor Florida. I'm sorry. The Oilers want the power plays 1 aside or 2 aside. And I know Edmonton's got a lethal power play, but this year the Oilers have a deeper team. Their strength is in their depth. How do you utilize that depth? You roll all 4 lines. You can't do that. You can't do that if you're constantly shorthanded or even on the power play. Obviously, they would love 4 power plays with Florida getting none. But my point is there was no rhythm established in that game. And I just think that type of game, Florida's more used to playing that type of game. Florida's more used to the chaos, to just having to deal with that sort of thing. I mean, the Panthers are a deep team too. I'm not saying the Oilers necessarily have greater depth. In fact, I think one of the matchups in this series that Edmonton has to figure out, and that's been the whole league since the line was established, is that third line is really hurting Edmonton 5-on-5. As it was the decisive factor in Florida's first 3 rounds, and thus far it's been a dangerous line for the Oilers to have to deal with 5-on-5, and that's the Lundell, Marchand, Luostarinen line. And, it's not really a traditional third line. Marchand will never remind anyone of a third line player. And as you guys know, Barkov has missed a handful of games the last 2 or 3 years. And whenever he misses games, who plays first line center for Florida? Anton Lundell. And you know what? In the short term, do you ever really notice a difference? And I'm talking about a 3-time Selke Award winner. But in the short term, and Neil will tell you this, over the long term, you'd feel that difference. But over the short term, Lundell steps in, and there's no drop-off from Alexander Barkov. And I know that's making a major statement, but I've actually called a few of those games in the regular season when Lundell's playing first-line center. And I've seen Florida beat Edmonton head-to-head with Lundell as their first-line center. So believe me, he can play. That's why that third line is so devastating, is you've got 2 guys who could play anywhere else in anyone else's lineup. They happen to be third-line players for Florida, and it's been a matchup that, as you'd expect, is lopsided in favor of the Panthers. The Oilers have to find a way to saw that one off.
Oilers have been very disciplined by and large for the first 2 games, kind of not getting pulled into the trap of a lot of the shenanigans that go on with their sandpaper guys, Kachuk, Marchand, Bennett. And in this one, they fell into it. Retaliated, things that were just very
that's one way to put it. They
Right.
jumped with both feet in. Yeah, no. And I agree with you. That's not their game. I mean, whether it's the reckless, high sticking penalties, the unforced errors that you talked about, the too many men on the ice in the first period, or whether it's getting into the rough stuff, that's ultimately, again, that's not going to help Edmonton. It's not necessarily going to hurt them, but it's not playing to your strengths. The strengths of the Oilers are still their depth, their rhythm, their speed, their pace, and their high-end elite finish. If you're getting into that type of game, you're playing away from that. You are, unless it's one-sided where you can make a team pay on the power play. And quite frankly, that power play, I know it scored last night, and I know it's been 8 straight games with a power play goal. But again, it's sometimes when you score. In game 1, it paid off for the Oilers. They scored when they needed to, and that was in overtime when Nosek threw it over the glass. But in game 2, with a 5-on-3 and a chance for separation in this series, which had not occurred until last night, Edmonton did not take advantage of the 5-on-3, and Florida ended up, winning that game in double overtime. So I agree with you. This is not a series where Edmonton wants to entertain a multiple line brawl situation, a bunch of roughing penalties. And also, again, to my point with respect to the first period, Edmonton does not want to play a game where 16 of the first 22 minutes are played on special teams. No matter how good their power play is, I still don't necessarily think that plays to the strength of the Oilers.
Jack, I want to visit one thing about a loss for the Oilers. What does the loss of Zach Hyman mean to this series?
Well, obviously, it's another net front presence, and that's big battleground in this series. I mean, let's face it. I think the Oilers have added some guys who can establish some territorial play in front of the net. Guys, like Corey Perry now in his second year with the team, but Vasily Podkolzin, Evander Kane now that he's healthy. He didn't play, remember, after last year's game 2 in the final. Trent Frederick, another guy who can get to the front of the net. Zach Hyman is one of those guys, and he does it a different way. He's not necessarily going to always be jostling your goalie or getting in one scrum after another, but he's certainly an irritant, and he's a guy that you have to clear out. You have to account for Zach Hyman in front of your net, and now he's not there. And he's not there as a net front presence on the power play. And he's not there from a standpoint of a guy that still scored 27 goals this year. I mean, it wasn't the 54 he had the year prior. I don't think you'll see that. That was Zach's pinnacle in a year where everything went in, but he's still, a weapon on this team. Having said all that, Neil, I don't think the Oilers are ever more equipped than this year to deal with the loss of a Zach Hyman, because they do have guys that are chipping in on a regular basis. They've got 14 forwards with a goal in this year's Stanley Cup playoffs. You can only play 12. I mean, they've got guys who aren't playing that have contributed to this team on a regular basis all year long. They've got 20 guys overall who've scored a goal in the Stanley Cup playoffs. That's one shy of a league record. So they've got depth to withstand it, but that doesn't mean that they don't miss Hyman on the ice. And he's a bit of a glue guy, too. He's been here 4 years now, and he's a nice conduit and a bridge between the absolute elite in that locker room with respect to McDavid and Draisaitl and everyone else. And you need those guys, as you know, Neil, when you have those upper echelon players. And obviously with the Rangers, I think you had Gretzky and Messier on the team at the same time for a year, I think. I mean, you need a bridge between those personalities and the other guys on the team. You need a handful of guys. As inclusive as Gretzky and Messier and McDavid and Draisaitl are, it still helps to have those mid-range veterans. And, I mean, it's a little bit insulting to call Hyman a mid-range veteran, but I think you know what I'm getting at in terms of a guy that helps ease transition of personalities and games. And Zach Hyman is one of those glue guys inside the dressing room for the Edmonton Oilers. Makes everyone feel comfortable.
Yeah, and I want to comment, Jack, that I was in the car last night and I purposely put on the Edmonton radio feed because I knew you were doing it. And this was before the game started. I want to make a serious point here. You just said about Zach Hyman being a bridge. Zach Hyman and Ryan Nugent-Hopkins do an ad together for a company in Edmonton on radio. And you could see that there was a camaraderie there, even in that commercial, between Zach Hyman and Nuge, as his nickname is, Ryan Nugent-Hopkins. And it really came through on the radio. So just to your point about being a bridge, you're not expecting McDavid and Draisaitl to do an ad for an air conditioning company, but there you had Zach Hyman and Nugent-Hopkins doing it and having fun with it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and again, I'm not trying to put McDavid and Draisaitl on a pedestal because they don't. But as you know, Neil, when you're a younger player coming into this league, and I'm sure the Rangers were the same way. No matter how effervescent and inclusive those high-end players are, it's still intimidating for younger players or even players from another organization to come into your room and all of a sudden they're sitting opposite living legends like Gretzky and Messier. And Edmonton has the same thing at play with guys. I mean, Trent Frederick, he's an established NHL player, but you don't think he's a little googly-eyed when he walks into the dressing room and he's got, two of the world's 3 or 4 best players in McDavid and Draisaitl across the room. They're going to be engaging and friendly, but it helps to have guys like Hyman and Nugent-Hopkins there to help, again, just assimilate everybody. And that's what Hyman does for the team. Do you need that necessarily in the Stanley Cup final? Of course, by this point, that's kind of established, but it's still a presence in the room. It's still a comforting presence in the room that you no longer have. Sure, he's around the team. You can talk to him, but it's different between periods when you don't have a guy like that maybe can speak up and settle everyone down when they need it.
Let's hit the goaltending for a second, because I think something that gets lost in Game 3 is Sergei Bobrovsky made several really good saves in that opening period. And I don't think you can really fault Stu Skinner on any of the goals that were given up. Maybe the second goal on the short side, maybe he could have had, but he gets pulled after the 5th goal, relieved by Calvin Pickard, who gives up 1 goal the rest of the way. Do you see them going back to Skinner, or is it now Pickard's turn to kind of carry the mail here?
It's a tough decision because of where you're at. It's Game 4 of the Stanley Cup final. I think if it's, a Game 1 loss, it might be an easier decision because you still got a long series. If Pickard falters in Game 2, it's still, 2-0, but you've already rallied once before in the Stanley Cup playoffs this year, in fact, from a 2-0 series hole. It's another thing, to go to Calvin Pickard and he falters, and now you're 1 game away from elimination. You're counting on Stuart Skinner to win 3 in a row. It's a difficult decision. I've always found that, especially for a Western Conference club, it is curious for me on the teams, and many of them are structured this way, where you go 50-30 in the regular season, and then all of a sudden you go 25-0 in the playoffs. That's a strange breakdown for me. I've always thought it was a bit weird. It's not like, Edmonton has a Marty Brodeur that they've played 70 times this year, or for that matter, Cam Talbot, who they played 73 times back in 16-17. This is a team, and I've talked about this in the other positions, but this is a team that's built on their depth. That depth includes goaltending, where their backup goalie happens to be 6-0 in the playoffs. Is his save percentage off the charts? No, it's not. But then again, neither is your starters. I mean, Stuart Skinner, I haven't looked this morning. I would say it's roughly around 900. It's not 920. It's not 910. So I do struggle with this. I do wonder, for instance, in 2011, when it was so clear the home road splits, what would have happened if Vancouver had started Corey Schneider, a capable backup in Game 4 or Game 6? Would they have won in Boston? We won't know. But what we did know is that by that point, Roberto Luongo and the Canucks as a whole weren't playing that great away from home. This is a tough decision. It really is. My gut is that they will go back to Stuart Skinner. But Calvin Pickard should certainly be an option. And I think you can tell in my voice that this may be the toughest decision that Chris Knobloch has faced as head coach of the Edmonton Oilers, is who to go with in Game 4. Because all season long, they've rallied around Calvin Pickard. That's not to say they haven't done the same with Stuart Skinner. They certainly did after a heartbreaking last-second loss, literally, in Game 3 of the Vegas series, and allowed Skinner to go on a serious run, which culminated in the Game 1 overtime victory over the Florida Panthers. But now, where you've lost back-to-back games for the first time since Skinner dropped the first two in L.A., you do have a decision to make. My gut is they'll go back to Skinner, but it's certainly going to be on the table to start Calvin Pickard.
And the interesting piece here is perhaps this would still be Pickard's net had he not gotten injured.
He didn't lose the net. I mean, he's 6-0. He didn't lose the net because he was ineffective. He's 6-0. And that's, again, what you trust the most. What do you trust the most? Who do you want? Is it theoretically your best goaltender? If you broke everything down, do you go with the best goaltender on the whole? Or do you trust what's, carried you this far in this postseason and, quite frankly, in the regular season? And that's a team that's deep at every position, including the goaltender. Calvin Pickard has had a career year, 22-10-1 during the regular season, 6-0 in the playoffs. He hasn't come close to that for the entirety of his career. Do you trust that he's got, one more in the satchel? I mean, Neil and I grew up, listening and hearing about the Cleveland Indians deciding to go with Gene Bearden in the 1948 playoff game as a rookie against the Boston Red Sox. Did Gene Bearden do anything after 1948? No, he did not. But for 1 year, he got the Indians over the hump. That is, I bet when we signed up to do this show, you didn't think you'd hear Gene Bearden, but here we go.
100%.
I am nothing if not the king of the obscure.
Jack, on a positive note, to get you out of here, the Oilers have an extra day off, as do the Panthers, of course. But the timing couldn't be better for them to have an extra day off than coming off a loss like that. How is that going to? You've been around this team so much. I mean, how will this help them going into Game 4?
Well, I think the first three games, it's not like they've been played at a frenetic pace. There was 2 days off between games 2 and 3. But I do think in a matchup of this magnitude, and we saw 2 tremendous hockey games. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I thought the quality of hockey is as good as it's been in the Stanley Cup final in a long time. This is not a series where in the first 2 games it looked like just a battle of attrition, whoever was left standing, which sometimes it is in the Stanley Cup final, where, the winner is almost who's healthier, who's got more bodies. And it's Joan Benoit reaching the finish line in an Olympic marathon. I mean, it can feel that way. I didn't feel that way about the first 2 games at all. In fact, the first period of Game 2 might have been the best hockey I've ever seen played live. I mean, and again, Neil, you've seen 87 Canada Cup, 4 Nations off was great. I'm just, in a Stanley Cup final, I'm not sure we've seen better hockey than what we saw in Game 2 on Friday night, particularly the first period, where teams were scoring goals by making unbelievable plays, not by breakdowns, not by turnovers. I mean, these 2 teams really established a high quality. Then as we talked about, Edmonton got away from that in Game 3, and it was a ragged kind of slugfest, and Florida obviously, dominated and cruised to victory. So now I think you have a chance to kind of reset. You've got a couple days before Game 4 to, as you point out, sometimes you want to park it in the regular season and play the next night. I think in the playoffs, you need to wash it. You need to let the sting of that loss subside and understand that if you win on Thursday, just as Florida, for the first time under Paul Maurice, lost a game when they left after 2 periods. But by Friday night, guys, they were getting on that plane thinking, we got what we came for. We got the split. If the Oilers go out and play a composed 60 minutes on Thursday, they'll have gotten exactly what they wanted when they came down to South Florida. And that's regaining home ice advantage and turning this series into a best of 3 when 2 of the games are going to be played at Rogers Place. That's all that's required here. It won't matter at all, the 6-1 loss. They won't think about it on Monday. They won't remember it for a moment as long as they get the win on Thursday.
And Jack, just to further emphasize your point, I've seen many, many playoff series where there is an outlandish score in one of the games or 2 of the games, and either way, and the other team won the series. So I've seen this in the American League many times, and then you think, well,
we saw it last year in the final.
Yeah, we did.
Last year in the final, Edmonton won 8-1. It didn't help him in Game 7. There's no carryover. This isn't soccer. There's no aggregate.
Well, and the reason, in my opinion, the reason why this happens more often in playoffs than in the regular season is because you're only playing for a win in the playoffs. You're not playing for stats. You're not playing for, the Maurice Richard Trophy. You're not playing for anything other than the win. So, for example, a coach might pull his goalie and 3 empty net goals go in the playoffs. You wouldn't do that in the regular season. So to emphasize your point about the 8-1 last year and the 6-1 last night, it won't mean anything to anybody if the Oilers can pull back together again and play and get accomplished what they came to South Florida to do.
They get a win in Game 4, Neil, and it's a best-of-3 series, and Edmonton has home ice advantage, which is how the series started, except it was a best-of-7. It's that simple. And, you can look at this any which way, but I'll tell you what, the team that had the most goals in last year's Stanley Cup final and the team that outshot the other opponent last year's Stanley Cup final didn't win. Edmonton outscored Florida 23-18. What did that get them? Nothing. So, again, I don't think the score matters. It really, the only thing that was surprising is the last 5 games between these 2 clubs, including the 2 in the regular season, had all been decided by 1 goal. So you weren't necessarily expecting it. But I agree. I think in the Stanley Cup, everything gets magnified. And when it's one team's night, and not the other teams in the playoffs, that can sometimes lead to a runaway. So the 2 days off, I think it allows Edmonton to have a structured practice today, a bit of a reset tomorrow, and then it's what they came for, which is a win in South Florida and a chance to regain home ice advantage in this series, which I still think will be a long series. And in a long series, ultimately the score of 1 game matters not the least.
If there's one game that it could go off the rails and you could still look at it as maybe, okay, let's just put this one behind us, it is Game 3 because, as you said, you have the opportunity, or the Oilers do, to regain home ice advantage in Game 4. What do you expect from the Oilers? Because Neil and I have spoken in our preview and over the first 2 games that the Oilers have to really succeed at Florida's game, getting in deep, initiating. And I thought, by and large, they were reactive in Game 3. They clearly have to initiate below the goal lines in Florida's end. You agree with that?
Well, I think most importantly, they've got to play with poise. They've got to stay out of some of the stuff they, got into on Monday night. Look, the Oilers have guys who can do that, but they also don't want them ending up in the penalty box. Evander Kane had 2 penalties in the first 3 minutes of, first 3 shifts he took. And they don't want that. And I'm not picking on Evander. I mean, those were stick infraction penalties. It wasn't like he was trying to run through Sergei Bobrovsky. While the Oilers are a deeper team in that regard, they have some guys that can get underneath your skin, like Corey Perry, Evander Kane, and Trent Frederick. I still, again, I'll reemphasize this. They got to play to their strengths. And their strengths are rolling lines and playing 5-on-5. And in this series, I think they have the opportunity to let their high-end performers outperform Florida's. That was what was troubling last night. That turnover got Sam Reinhart off the schneid. He had really been snake-bitten in this series, missed a breakaway, missed the net in Game 2, and then even early in Game 3, he missed a power play tap-in. And you don't want to get that guy rolling offensively, especially when he may be compromised. And Matthew Tkachuk, I think, is dealing with something as well. So it's not just Edmonton banged up in this series. We talked about Zach Hyman. Obviously, Ryan Nugent-Hopkins was a game-time decision heading into Game 3. The biggest area where Edmonton might have an edge, I talked about Florida's edge, and that's the third line. But the biggest area where Edmonton might have an edge is its high-end guys are going right now. McDavid and Draisaitl didn't see the score sheet on Monday night, but it's the first time since December 3rd that they played a game where neither of them were on the score sheet. So you could expect them to revert to the mean. What is a subtle, kind of underpining situation, even as Florida leads this series 2-1, is I know Reinhart got the goal, but they've got nothing for Barkov. And Matthew Tkachuk is slightly hobbled. He does have 2 assists in the 3 games. But where I think Edmonton has the edge is its high-end guys are going right now at a greater rate offensively than Florida's top-end guys. And I realize Barkov is a two-way player, but they're going to need something offensively from him in order to win this series. And right now, I think Edmonton, if it can saw everything out and let its high-end talent, still, I think when you've got the 2 best players in the series, and Barkov is close, but he's not in McDavid and Draisaitl's league, that can be the separation for you when you have the depth that Edmonton now possesses. In prior seasons, I wouldn't have said that. But this year, the Oilers have the depth. And sometimes when you have the depth, your high-end talent can push you over the hump in a tight series. That's what I look for in Game 4, and that's what I look for moving forward in this series. If the Oilers are to win the Stanley Cup, I do think that could be the separation that gives them the nod. If Florida wins this series, I think ultimately, decisively, it'll be that third line I talked about with Marchand, Lundell, and Luostarinen. The Oilers have to find a way to negate that Florida advantage moving forward in this series.
Jack, we'll leave it at that. Dinner on South Beach tonight?
Oh, of course. I mean, although not quite. I'm not going all the way down to Miami. I'm right here on the beach in Fort Lauderdale. No reason to go down to South Beach. So I'm going to whatever they would call, this is A1A Beach, as you know. It's good enough for me.
All right, Jack, once again, thanks so much for joining us. And as a great play-by-play announcer says, the pleasure was all ours.
Not bad, Vic. Maybe a 6.5 out of 10. He'll coach you up.
And the Oilers go on the power play. Thanks, Jack.
Guys.
Thanks, Jack. And a reminder that our website is NHLWraparound.com. Stanley Cup Day will return Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday this week as we continue coverage of games 4 and 5 of the Stanley Cup Final. And our next NHL Wraparound will take place Monday, June 16th. Neil, I don't have the logoed shirt today, but this is my second Lugaroo shirt. And like the first one, my white one, equally comfortable, looks great. And I think for all of those that are listening and watching to our podcast, the way you guys support us, support this product because it is outstanding apparel.
And it is. And I can tell you that for sure we wouldn't be saying this if it wasn't, but we were talking before the show about how these shirts are like, you don't even feel like you're wearing anything. The material is great. The collars are great. The way that snaps up is great. And it's all done by the founder of Lugaru's, Colin Mulvey. And Colin, I got to know him through my friend in one of the trainers for the Chicago Blackhawks, Ryan Martin, told me about Colin Mulvey, who makes this apparel. And the name of the apparel is Lugaroo, and that's spelled Loogaroo. So Lugaroo, and you should look it up because this stuff feels great. Colin sent me a bunch of different items, and they're all the same. They're all fantastic. It's really great apparel. He got into this because he wanted stuff that was comfortable to wear, that he could wear doing all kinds of activities during the day. And, it rang true for me, too, because I'll go to walk the dogs or go to do a little bit of yard work or something. And I'll always say, I better change into something else because I don't want to sweat into this shirt, or I don't want to sweat into those pants, or I don't want to, mess this stuff up. With this stuff, literally, you can do whatever you want to do. And if you have to wash it, you wash it. It comes out exactly the same as the last time you wore it. So I highly recommend to everyone that's listening, watching, go to lugaroo.co, not .com, .co, LOOGAROO.co, and take a look at what they've got.
There you have it. When we speak with Jack Michaels, it's always frank. He's very boned up on the league, very boned up on his own team. And I think to look ahead to Game 4, he's really got a handle on what the Oilers need to do to even this series up, regain home ice advantage, and bring this series back to Edmonton even.
And, if you were to watch the Edmonton Oilers regular season games and catch a telecast that he does, you might think because he's so enthusiastic that Jack's a homer for the Oilers, and he's really not. I mean, I'm when I sit and do this with you, Vic, with Jack, I'm so impressed by his understanding of the dynamics of the teams and the way it works within the locker room and outside the locker room and the different pieces to the puzzle. And his take on it is not like a GM would have a take on it, but it is still, you can listen to him and learn things and I've been in this game a long, long time. And I learned stuff from Jack Michaels when I'm sitting talking to him. I really love it. I love listening to what he says about the Oilers, what he says about the Panthers, and just a terrific interview.
You notice that he wasn't as enthusiastic with me imitating his sign off at the end of each of his games.
No, I know. I quite noted that.
Were you enthusiastic?
Yes, I thought it was. No. I thought it was wonderful.
Yeah, sure you did. I'll tell you what else is wonderful. I'll tell you what else is wonderful. How about Lane Hudson capturing the Calder Trophy as NHL Rookie of the Year? Played in all 82 games for the Canadiens, 60 assists, and for a player that kind of burst on the scene. I don't think a lot of people paid a lot of attention to him during the first half of the season, but as the Habs were making their push towards the playoffs, he clearly emerged as a front runner for the Calder Trophy. He beats out the Sharks' Macklin Celebrini and the Flames' Dustin Wolf. Well earned.
Very well earned. And I had been blowing a horn for him ever since I first started watching him earlier in the season because I just loved the way he played. He does have his defensive liabilities at times, but all great offensive defensemen have defensive liabilities because they take chances. That's why they're so good offensively. They take chances. Sergei Zubov, Cale Makar, Brian Leetch, you can go on and on. These great offensive defensemen, they have to take chances, and sometimes it backfires, and sometimes it did for Lane Hudson. But I think in coming years, Lane Hudson, Cale Makar, they're going to be going head-to-head for the Norris Trophy down the road.
On the other side of the table, we have a retirement to announce, and this came down on Monday that TJ Oshie retires after 16 seasons in the NHL, played 1,010 games, 695 points, but he missed all of the current season with a back injury. He is a 2018 Stanley Cup champion, and you remember one of those memorable moments that he shared with his dad, Tim, after the Stanley Cup triumph over the Golden Knights. His father had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's in 2012. And they say if a picture speaks 1,000 words, that the embrace that the two of them had was clearly one of those shots in time that just kind of sticks in your memory.
Absolutely. And those are the great parts. But the other part that sticks in my mind about TJ Oshie, although not as sentimental as the one you just said, was playing in the Olympics and taking all the penalty shots or the shootout shots for the American side. I thought that was unique. He was so good at the shootout that they said, "Oh, you just do them all."
And he scored on 4 out of 6 attempts against Sergei Bobrovsky to help the USA beat Russia in the preliminary round in the 2014 Sochi Olympics. So you remember what I said in our season preview way back in September that the Canucks would make the final?
Yes, I remember you saying that.
Turns out I was right after all, because the Abbotsford Canucks are advancing to the Calder Cup final against the Florida Panthers AHL affiliate, the Charlotte Checkers. The series opens on Friday in Charlotte, and the Canucks are coached by Manny Malhotra, who was the Rangers' first pick, 7th overall in 1998. Who was that GM?
Yeah, he was playing in Guelph, and I love this guy. I just thought he was a man playing with boys, in that he cerebrally such a good player in junior hockey, knew the game really well. Didn't have a great start with the Rangers, as you know, because we were trying to rebuild, and there was it wasn't a great start. I had left, and then he was traded for nothing to Dallas, and then traded a couple more times, but ended up having the career that I thought he would have, a long, long career of a coach's dream, a guy that knew the game inside out and could do whatever you wanted him to do. He wasn't a great offensive guy, wasn't going to get 50 goals a year, but he ended up being a great face-off man and had a very long career, and good for him. And I'll be cheering for Abbotsford against the team that's only 90 miles away from me, the Charlotte Checkers.
They may know your address. They may come get you.
Well, maybe I can play.
This is the human side of the story. It's June 10th, Neil. And 4 days from today would be the waiting is over.
Yes.
But this has nothing to do with that.
Okay.
So we're going to spin the Wayback Machine here to April 9th of 1980, Game 2 of the preliminary round series between the Whalers and the Canadiens at the Montreal Forum. And in the third period of an 8-4 Whalers loss, Gordie Howe scores his last ever goal in the Forum on a pass from Mark Howe, his son. Gordie backhands a shot in from about 40 feet that hits a Canadiens defenseman, goes in past Denny Herron, who is the Habs goalie. It was a shot that even the cameras did not pick up because he was so high in that left wing circle when he let that backhander in. Nonetheless, he is credited with the goal. And the box score says Gordie Howe from Mark Howe, 13:59 of the third period. But that's not all there is to this story, because if you go back and look at the video, Mark Howe receives the puck on a clear pass going around the back of the net from goaltender John Garrett. And for years, Garrett had looked to get this assist added on to the score sheet. And he didn't obviously challenge this immediately because after all, he did give up 8 goals in the game. But over the years, this became more and more significant, and Garrett became more and more adamant about wanting to have his assist attached to Gordie Howe's last goal. And the lobbying for this even went back to 2013 when the fans were campaigning with a "Give It to Cheech" hashtag, and Cheech was John Garrett's nickname. And still, the assist had never been awarded. And finally, during the second intermission of Game 2, Garrett was advised by Sportsnet host Ron McLean that the league will add this assist to the record just 16,494 days later. 45 years, 1 month, 28 days.
Amazing. Great story. What a great story. I know John Garrett. He actually was our goalie coach one year for the Rangers, and a great color man for the Canucks for many years. And well, good for him. I mean, I'd want it too if it was me. I mean, things mean more to you as life goes on than they do at the time. At the time, or within the 5 years after that, you're like, oh, well, you know, no big deal. But then all of a sudden you get to a certain age and it is a big deal. You want everything that you poo-pooed earlier in life.
I checked NHL.com and Hockey Reference, and as of this morning, that assist is still not in there. So if anybody from the league or Hockey Reference is listening, add it in there because it is now official. But there's a little bit more to the story, because 2 years and 4 months earlier, December of 1977, Gordie Howe scored his 1,000th professional goal. This included the NHL, the WHA, regular season, and playoffs. And he scored his 1,000th goal in, of all places, Birmingham, Alabama.
Wow. Birmingham Bulls.
Birmingham Bulls. You know who the goalie was?
No.
John Garrett.
There you go. So we go full circle.
We go full circle. Speaking of Gordie, do you have a favorite Gordie Howe story? Because I'm sure that you had met him on many occasions.
Well, my favorite Gordie Howe story is lining up at Eaton's in the Don Mills shopping plaza. Eaton's was a department store well known in Canada, a department store chain throughout Canada, named after the Eaton family. That was a very wealthy, rich family in Canada. Gordie Howe was there signing autographs, and I think selling his book was called Hockey Here's How, Howe, with his 2 sons, of course, on the Rooster Tails on the ice with him on the cover. And I got to meet Gordie Howe as, gosh knows how old I was, 7, 8, 9 at that time. So that's my favorite story because, you know, at that time, you know, it's not reality. These are just mega stars to you as a little kid.
I was fortunate enough to actually work with Gordie Howe. And when I had left ESPN in 1990, I went to a startup outfit, which turns out didn't last very long, called Sports News Network down in Roslyn, Virginia. And part of that group drawing me out of ESPN was saying that you would get to work with Gordie Howe. And indeed I did. And I had the opportunity to field produce, but also work with him in the studio and kind of help him along with some of the little finer points of adapting to sitting on a set and being on television. When he would fly in, I would pick him up at the airport, and he actually called me coach. If you can imagine that. Yeah. And Gordie also worked a few games, 3 games to be exact, in Boston Garden during the Oilers-Bruins final that year. And I worked with him on that. And even in our video open, the photo of me and Gordy standing on the ice pretending to hold sticks is there. And it is a photo that I still hold very dear to me as my career has evolved. And of course, now I'm here with you on this podcast.
Oh, God, have you ever fallen? Imagine at one time with Gordie Howe, now stuck with me. As we said the other day, now you're with the Rain Man and you're the Brain Man.
And that will close our show for today. No better way to do it. Thanks for Jack Michaels from Sportsnet for joining us. Thanks to UBS Financial Services, Inc. NHL Wraparound and UBS Financial Services, Inc. are not affiliated. UBS is a sponsor of 3 things you need to pay attention to. No other affiliation, relationship, or endorsement is made, suggested, intended, or should be implied or inferred between UBS and VNS Productions, LLC, or any of the individuals or businesses and or their respective products and services appearing in this program.
And we want to say thanks to the listeners and the watchers on YouTube. Send questions or comments to nhlwraparound@gmail.com, or you can reach us individually. If you want to just swear at me individually, you can do that at neil@nhlwraparound.com. Or if you want to criticize Vic in any way, you can get him at vic@nhlwraparound.com. Don't forget that all of our podcasts are on all podcast platforms, including Apple Podcasts, Amazon, iHeartRadio, Spotify, YouTube, and our complete catalog of all the podcasts we've done since January of 2024 can be found on our website that Vic mentioned earlier, nhlwraparound.com. So subscribe, like us, give us a thumbs up, or check out some of our shorter clips on X, which we are called there, surprise, surprise, at NHL Wraparound. Stanley Cup date returns Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday of this week with coverage of games 4 and 5. The next wraparound, as Vic has said earlier in the show, is Monday, June 16th. Take care, everybody.
Thanks for joining us on the NHL Wraparound Podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to stay up to date on all the NHL action.